long-term snow cover that has required additional feed resources, repeated bouts of long-term cold that has made it challenging for the mama cows just to maintain weight, as well as the pressure that's put on feedlot cattle. I think we've seen a several-month convergence of items that have made beef production especially hard. And so as you look at some of the programs that we've been talking about that provide flood relief, USDA has opened the window of opportunity for county committees to look at that long-term compound effect for the livestock indemnity program for producers that maybe have felt the impact of the polar vortex or just the mud that many producers are dealing with, as well as opportunities to look over a larger window than the one that's initially provided under the livestock indemnity program, which I think will be useful to some of the producers, especially cow-calf producers across the upper Midwest. You know, the Farm Bill is, we're working very hard to get that implemented at USDA as well right now. One of the things that your organization probably has been most interested in as we've gone through that is the new three-legged stool that we talked about, and we worked with Congress from a technical assistance perspective at APHIS to take a look at how do we take different components that we've used for years with, you know, border surveillance, working with producer organizations and industry groups to see how we continue to increase biosecurity and awareness about how producers can help be a part of protecting themselves, as well as partnering with USDA to keep pests and diseases out of the U.S. With our laboratory network that many states struggle to have the resources to not only maintain accreditation, but also have enough diagnostic ability available in the event that we did have an animal disease outbreak. With a new concept that was part of the discussion very in the forefront with a vaccine bank. So Congress allocated some upfront money as well as some authority for us to work within those three areas of emphasis to be able to figure out how we divide up and prioritize those monies to have impact not only for the pork and beef industry, which I think drove that debate around the vaccine bank, but also look at other species, especially the poultry industry that struggles from time to time with disease outbreaks as well, to have a balanced approach that everybody can benefit from. And so part of what we're in the process of doing right now at USDA as we work to implement those Farm Bill provisions is we need to hear from the industry. And so we've had many different sectors come into the office, even groups within those sectors come in to talk to us about what they see as priorities for the investment of those dollars. And Dr. Scheer and his team are busy taking a look at if we were going to start looking at a vaccine bank, which vaccines would we have in that? Would we want to include poultry vaccines as well? And then if we were thinking merely about foot and mouth disease, you know, there are 24 strains plus or minus out there at any given time floating around. You know, which ones would we concentrate on? Do we want to assume it'll be an accidental introduction or a terroristic introduction, which makes a difference on which strains you think might be important? So, and then how do we invest in something that might have a 5-year shelf life so that maybe there's a way to rotate that stockpile and get value out of it on both ends through its effective life, and then as it's getting down to its expiration date, is there a way we can cycle that out to recoup some of our investment to be able to reuse down the road? And so we're having those discussions right now. If any of you have special insights, I'm sure Dr. Scheer would love to hear those, and but very much the door is open to that discussion right now, and would love to hear from you. revenue. Obviously, as we talk about a vaccine bank, probably the disease that is of most top of mind concern right now is something that there isn't a vaccine for, and that's African swine fever. And the pork industry is very much concerned about African swine fever. You know, if you look at the numbers, I think the pork industry had their economists put together some numbers based on anecdotal as well as eyewitness reports from people that have traveled in and out of China since August. You know, they believe that the impact on China's pork production could be as much as 50%. And so as you start looking at that for a country that it is by far the majority of the protein source as far as red meat or meat is concerned for their population, that has significant opportunities to be disruptive within their food supply, as well as disruptive as far as world trade goes and how product moves around the world. And so I think we also should not underestimate how that might play into as we move forward in trade agreements, negotiating trade agreements, of how that might inspire countries to move forward with us and be able to open up and reestablish normalizing trade, not only with China, but within that region as well. And so we're going to continue to redouble our efforts at the border to protect the U.S. industry. I think there's a couple things that play there. One is we're working very closely with the swine industry. I probably talk to one of the leaders in the swine industry at least once a week, if not more often. Here a few weeks ago, probably a month now, and we invited them in to take a look at all the concerns that you hear in popular media, in the industry media, as well as producer-to-producer conversations, because it seemed like same issues that we thought we had talked about keep resurfacing as issues of concern. And so we sat down with them. I think they brought in a list of 12 concerns. By the time we were done adding on the ones that we had heard at different times, we talked about 17 different items of concern, whether that be feed and feed additives, animal movement, people movement, what's going on at the border, beagles, and how we might be able to enhance that. We came out with a list of 4 or 5 different things that we were going to do immediately, which included putting 60 more beagles at the border for CBP to use as a surveillance of passenger as well as cargo traffic. But we also talked about some things that you hear about a lot, like feed additives, and whether or not do we have testing protocols that are accurate and reliable. Is this a real threat? And does the industry, can they shut down the movement of feed and feed additives and still be able to maintain high quality diets? And that was an area that we landed that we probably don't have enough reason to cause shutdown there, and the impact on the industry, the negative impact might be more harmful than any perceived gain that we would get through taking action there right now. But we agreed to continue looking at science, continue analyzing and figuring out where we not only moved on that issue, but many other issues as well. And so I think that is something that's been a positive. We've also increased our conversations with Customs and Bureau Protection as we move forward. And we have increased the level of activity with our SITC group. And what that group is within APHIS is that's a group of inspectors that go around to ethnic markets in grocery stores, and they look at the mix of products that are in those, and they're trying to identify prohibited products that are making it some way into the United States even though they're prohibited. And as part of that, we've been able to identify, continue to identify, that's an active group that works all the time, but we've increased maybe our focus a little bit on meat products that might be of concern coming from China. And so when you saw the 1 million pound seizure in New Jersey a few weeks ago. That was a result of us identifying importers that we thought might be circumventing the system and asking CBP to tag those importers and take a look at some of their shipments. Now, while that made a big media splash, in reality it was probably about 38,000 pounds of pork-related products that were of concern, very much still prohibited, but they were like bouillon and noodle bowls that while it was still prohibited, it's been processed and probably the virus has been attenuated and wasn't of real concern. It was candied pork that also had gone through a processing process that probably wasn't of concern, but nonetheless it's prohibited, and so we want to lock down on that. And we're going to continue to work in partnership with CBP. We're going to continue to do everything we can in cooperation with the industry to protect the pork industry. I think the last thing that I want to leave you with on that subject, though, is that the same epidemiology that we have relied on and used to protect ourselves from China with their endemic foot and mouth disease and their endemic classical swine fever is the same protocols that we're continue to rely on to keep African swine fever out. And we can point to a long record, over a century, of being able to use those programs and our vigilance at the border to protect ourselves from foot and mouth disease and many other diseases. And so I think that shows that the system has the opportunity to work, and hopefully with redoubling our efforts, we put more confidence in that as well. There are some parallels out there, though, that where the industry does have some levels of concern. You know, high-path avian influenza marched across the Midwest very rapidly a few years ago, but I think that gave the poultry industry an opportunity to question its biosecurity protocols, the way they move feed in and products out of those poultry operations, and I think we've seen them take measures to try to address that. I think we've also, as PEDV moved across the Midwest a few years ago, the pork industry had the opportunity to take a look at some of those protocols that were in place and question whether or not they had sufficient biosecurity in place there. But I also think that we're not completely there domestically, because the last few summers we've had Seneca